Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit, and welcome to my After Hour Lounge. Today we're going to kick back in a nice big velvet chair with a small glass of Super Mutant Alien Assault. Not exactly a title that I think most people would have really noticed popping out of the crowd on Steam. It certainly sounds very, very generic, and of course you may very well be put off initially by looking at the screenshots and thinking, ugh, more pixel art. Last thing we need is yet another pixel art retro-inspired 2D platformer. Okay, well I'm here to tell you that's not what it is. It's developed by a company called Cybernate, and they describe it as the Citizen Kane of Supercratebox clones. An interesting description to say the least, and wearing their influences on their sleeve, surprisingly enough. Now, Supercratebox, of course, was a very fun little free game by Vlambeer that I enjoyed quite a lot, and it has spawned a number of clones, some of which incredibly brazen about it, such as Muffin Knight, which is an utter and complete rip-off of the title. That said, while this describes itself as a Cratebox clone, and you can see certain mechanics being derived from it, this is absolutely by no means the same game, and I actually have been quite impressed overall by the design of Super Mutant Alien Assault and had a decent time with it, so I'd like to show you why that is. So you have a set of different galaxies which consist of 4 levels each, and the type of level and game mode that you're going to be playing is picked from a pool and is basically randomized. You unlock more game modes as you go through the game, and you can also start with a starting item here. There's quite a bit more complexity in terms of the number of items and abilities that you have compared to, say, Supercratebox. And we'll just start on the first galaxy here. If you get through a galaxy, you're able to actually start later on. So if you want to beat the whole thing, you don't have to be stuck in the same pattern of losing and then going right back to the start again, which is something I certainly approve of. Alright, so it mentions that it's a Supercratebox clone. Well, one of the more obvious examples as to why that is would be the fact that, well, there are crates in it, and these crates generally contain weapons. However, this is not the main way of acquiring weapons. You might remember that Supercratebox was all about using whatever crazy weapon you happen to find in a crate, which usually had an upside and a downside. A lot of these weapons were pretty damn adept at killing you as much as they were killing the enemies. Now, this game has an aspect of that. You'll notice that the weapon I'm currently using is a grenade launcher, but the way that they've set things up with this title is that levels generally have a weapon dispenser that's on a timer, and you're expected to use whatever weapon that is. Now, if you happen to run out of ammunition, you actually have the option of using a sidearm, which is usually collectible in the game. Now, I've got far enough in the game to unlock the sidearm as a default starting item, which is really quite handy. So, you are stuck with that weapon, but you've got this weak little pistol that you can use if you happen to run out. There we go, switched out and got a nice big rocket launcher there as well. Now, similar to Supercratebox, they're going to be unlocking a bunch of different weapons as you go through. In fact, the game so far has been consistently feeding me unlocks. I'm doing terribly here, by the way, good lord. Right, finally got him. Lost a bunch of health there. You may also notice that it's not super instant death like Supercratebox was, but that is not entirely surprising, considering there's a lot more complexity to this and a lot more that you need to keep an eye on. Alright, I'm going to grab this. This is a special ability that I can use, which uses special ability ammo, which you can see up to the top there. I'm going to use this healing station, which has a limited number of charges, which is going to help me out. Now, the way that Supercratebox worked is that enemies would spawn at the top, and if they got to the pit down at the bottom, they would respawn at the top again in a much more powerful version. Now, they don't really do that in this one, but they have this sort of radioactive pulse thing. Now, if the radioactive pulse goes off too much, it will actually evolve the monsters into much more dangerous versions. Like you see right there, that one's a lot more dangerous now, takes a lot more damage, can do a lot more damage, is a bit faster or whatever. So you'll occasionally see enemies grow into larger forms or just become irradiated. So it does sort of work in the same way, it's just they've put their own unique sort of spin on things. I'm sort of desperately trying to find my way over to the weapon dispenser right there. Thankfully I have some explosives I can use, which should help, and I can use that ability right there. There we go, got myself a shotgun. I'm gonna toss that explosive. You'll notice that you have secondary explosives with limited ammo, and also they can blow up in your hand, so you may want to, you know, not do that. This is a terrible start. And you also have a bunch of different abilities, so like I've got I think I Did I acquire double jump? I thought I acquired double jump. Evidently, I didn't. I have that special charge ability, which uses the special ammunition, so I can use that to hit things. There we go. That's double jump. So that's a perk I can grab. So there's an awful lot more to it, I think, than Supercratebox. There's more complexity, generally more items, and you actually have what I guess I'd call a small form of character progression going through it. You end up with a set of equipment. Now, you'll also notice that each of these level types actually has a slightly different sub-objective. This time here, what we've got is a couple of things which will overcharge and explode if I don't get to them in time. Now, that will wipe the enemies off the map, but it will also do damage to me, so I've got to keep an eye on that. And I've encountered a couple of different game modes up to this point. The hyperdrive mode you saw earlier, that involved me getting fuel to the hyperdrive so that I can move on to the next location. There's a straight-up kill mode. There's a mode whereby you have to roll this fuel container, but if it comes into contact with an enemy, it'll actually explode and evolve them. So you got to watch out for that. And you also have these boss fight modes like this one right here. A little tricky. Got to watch out for those. There we go. Got myself a couple of explosives. Try not to blow myself up with them if at all possible. The boss fight modes actually remind me of some of the enemies going super crazy in Supercratebox when they reach the bottom of the level. I imagine there's quite a bit of inspiration involved there. I'm going to put down a det pack and hopefully run the enemy over the det pack and detonate it. Screwed that up a little bit. But you've got to admire what they've done with this, in my opinion. I think they've really taken that Supercratebox formula and they've done a lot with it. It seems like it's a little bit easier, but the amount of complexity that's on offer, the number of different weapons that you have to deal with, the fact that you have things like explosives, secondaries, special abilities, perks, and all sorts of things like that, and all of those abilities also have a fairly large chance of blowing you up in the process, is, in my opinion, quite an interesting little spin on the Supercratebox idea. I don't think it's fair to call it a poor clone. I think it's actually quite the opposite. And as you'll notice, I'm going to be getting more and more and more unlocks. The sheer amount of weapons and different enemy types and game modes and perks and special abilities that unlock in this game keeps the replayability going quite nicely. We have a defense mode right here, which gives me a dash. Well, that's a nice little ability to have. All right, we're on another hyperdrive mission here as well. So while the arcade gameplay initially might feel a little bit simplistic, there's actually a decent degree of complexity that does make the game challenging and also make sure that every playthrough feels very, very different. Now, Supercratebox felt like that a little bit as well because you never knew which weapon you'd get out of the crate. This game takes that, but then adds a bunch more to that and said, all right, well, you know, we get it. It's pretty cool to have random weapons out of crates. So what if you also had random abilities, random sidearms, random explosives? And what if we had random game modes as well? So you didn't have to do exactly the same thing every time. What if we did that? And the answer is, if you do that, you actually make a game which has a metric ton of replayability. You know, it's enjoyably challenging. It's enjoyably varied. And you never know what's going to be coming down the pipeline when it comes to a new unlock. I'm going to get a minigun next right now. This is a Pogo Blaster. It is a pogo stick weapon that is surprisingly effective and is a lot of fun to use. The idea of Supercratebox was that you kind of had to adapt to the situation based on the gun that you were given. In that game, you also had to collect the crates to get to the next level. You don't really have to do that this time, but you do have to switch out your weapons fairly frequently because of the limited ammunition, so that theme is there. One other thing I'd like to point out as well is that while this game uses pixel art, which I know quite a few people are maybe getting sick of, it's worth differentiating between good pixel art and bad pixel art, not to mention the fact that there are various different styles of pixel art that people can use. And I'm actually quite impressed by the level of detail with the pixel art in this title. I think it's really quite good. It looks like a really nicely designed Super Nintendo game. It looks like they put a great deal of effort into the pixel art in this particular title. And as a result, it looks crisp, it's very colorful, the explosions are very satisfying, the weapon effects are great. So I think you can absolutely, without question, admire what they did with the pixel art this time around, rather than view it as a downside. And it's a shame that pixel art has got such a reputation on Steam over the last few years, really just due to overuse and abuse. People that weren't really particularly good at it. I know saying pixel art is bad is almost like saying, well, textures are bad. It's like, well, no, bad textures are bad. No, it is very much a case of how well you execute the art style and how suitable it is for the game as to whether or not it's actually any good. And in this case, I'd say, yeah, it actually is good. I very much do like the pixel art style this time around. I'm gonna toss a couple of grenades down there. That should do the trick. If there's one thing I don't enjoy about it, it's probably the music. It's not my style. It's, from what I can tell, dubstep, which I strongly dislike. I'll let you listen to a little bit of it. You can make up your own mind. But if there is one weakness that I'd say the game does have, it would be its soundtrack. I would turn that off personally and play my own music, but here's what it sounds like. Yeah, if you're into that, then good on you. I personally turned the music off once I started playing for about 10 minutes and put on my own music, but hey, you know, that's not a big downside. What you basically have here is a well-designed and extremely varied arcade action game with a lot of replayability. It's got a metric ton of unlocks, some really fun enemy and weapon designs, a bunch of added complexity, which I don't think bogs the game down. And there's certainly a real risk of that. You know, you look at a game like Supercratebox and its simplicity, and you can say, well, you know, the beauty of that game is in its simplicity, and I'd say to some degree you are right, but adding a bunch of different abilities and perks and weapon types and defensive abilities like dodge and phase and teleport and all that sort of thing adds a pleasing amount of complexity to the game. And it gives you that nice character development feel, where every run your character does feel just a little bit different, and that becomes more and more true the more of the game you actually play. I do appreciate the fact that its normal mode is relatively forgiving. Now, the game can be very challenging. It does have much higher difficulty levels than the one I'm playing on, but I appreciate the fact that once you reach the end of a galaxy, it will let you start from there again. You don't lose all your progress. There's been certainly a trend as of late to do that with games, and I'm not the world's biggest fan of that. I know some people really do enjoy that aspect of certain model titles. I don't like my time being wasted, but you're always feeling like you're putting some progress in this game, whether it be unlocking a new galaxy, whether it be unlocking a new item, weapon, ability, enemy type, or all sorts of things like that. It feels like the game is constantly in motion, constantly evolving, and you are constantly being rewarded for playing it. And it certainly helps that the core gameplay is just generally very enjoyable in and of itself. It's a fairly challenging platform-based arcade action game, and, you know, it's lovely to see a game like Supercratebox sort of inspire its own subgenre, and then a game come along in that subgenre that evolves it in a fairly significant way, and is actually hell of enjoyable to play, you know? Isn't that a wonderful thing to see, rather than just a clone, rather than just something that thrives on its own unoriginality and rides on the coattails of another game, to see a title that took some of the ideas that that game had and really put its own unique spin on it and evolved it. That's, I think, what Super Mutant Alien Assault does. And for $8, which is what it costs, I think that you might find a decent amount of arcade action enjoyment in this with a lot of replayability. It's also worth noting that if you have a friend at home, it does support local co-op, which is a great feature. It's a shame that it is not supported online, of course, but if you've got somebody to play with at home, that may very well be a significant selling point for you, as well as it should. It harkens back to older titles. It harkens back to stuff on the Super Nintendo, but it adds that modern progression spin to it. And, of course, the ability to blow yourself up if you happen to be absolutely terrible at it, which I certainly am. But I've enjoyed it, even though I do suck, because I've always felt like I've got something out of it every time I've played through, even if I did die in the first couple of stages, because they're always unlocking new stuff for you, and they're always throwing new mixes into the works here. You know, what a great example, I think, of a game using progression in a way that enhances the mechanics of the game rather than limits them. It doesn't feel like everything's locked behind an unnecessary wall. It feels like the game just wants you to keep discovering new stuff all the time and actually getting enjoyment out of that and constantly having to change your tactics, because as soon as you learned one set of enemies, along comes another one. As soon as you've learned how to use one weapon without blowing yourself up, along comes another one. It's a great little example of evolving a game that inspired it. Super Mutant Alien Assault, ladies and gentlemen, available currently for $8 on Steam or your regional equivalent. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, by all means, do feel free to click the like button. If not, the dislike button is right over there, and feel free to check out my other After Hour videos, wherein I go in search of interesting indie titles. Which is exactly what this one is. You are guaranteed to find something at least cool every time you open an After Hour video. I'll see you next time.